November the 18th, 1942, above Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, the hands of an unnamed Japanese Zero pilot tightened on his control stick, his gaze fixed on the American fighters climbing from the muddy airstrip below. This day marked the first time pilots of the 339th Fighter Squadron engaged Japanese aircraft, a historic moment that would shatter 3 years of assumed Japanese air dominance. Through his canopy, the pilot watched a sight that contradicted every tenet of Japanese naval aviation doctrine. He was seeing strange twin-boomed American fighters, Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, that Japanese intelligence had smugly dismissed as heavy and clumsy. Yet, these peculiar twin-tailed aircraft were climbing like nothing we have seen, gaining altitude faster than his nimble Mitsubishi A6M Zero could match. Since Pearl Harbor, the Zero had reigned supreme. No Allied fighter could match its climb rate or maneuverability. But here, above this blood-soaked island, American pilots in their twin-engined Ghosts were dictating the terms of battle from altitudes the Zero struggled to reach. The pilot was confronted with a terrifying paradox. How could a seemingly heavy, twin-engine design defeat the legendary fighter whose very existence was predicated on lightweight agility? The era of the Zero was ending, not with a dogfight, but with a simple, sickening realization of vertical inferiority. This impossible sight was the beginning of the end for the Japanese pilots' psychological edge. The assumption since 1941, from China to Pearl Harbor, was that the Zero reigned supreme. No Allied fighter could match its climb rate or maneuverability. This was the fundamental truth upon which their entire air combat doctrine rested. The tight turning radius of the Zero was legendary, making it deadly in any traditional dogfight. However, here, above the blood-soaked skies of Guadalcanal, American pilots in their peculiar twin-engined fighters were dictating the terms of battle from altitudes the Zero struggled to reach. The P-38s from the 339th Fighter Squadron immediately established a superior altitude performance that transformed the conflict. By executing attacks from heights, the P-38s completely neutralized the Zero's legendary turning ability, rendering its prized maneuverability useless. In this first engagement, the P-38s claimed 3 Japanese aircraft, proving that the mathematics of aerial supremacy were being rewritten not in dogfighting manuals, but in the stark reality of the P-38's advantage in the vertical dimension. The initial reaction of confusion and shock felt by the Japanese pilots was so profound, precisely because of the towering status quo established over the preceding year. Since December 7, 1941, Japanese naval aviators had swept across the Pacific with an aura of invincibility. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero, with its incredible range, tight turning radius, and superior handling, had earned a fearsome reputation. The Zero's maximum speed of 332 mph at its critical altitude was impressive, but its true lethality lay in its ability to turn inside any Allied fighter, making it deadly in traditional dogfights. This dominance was a proven fact. Japanese pilots shot down obsolete Brewster Buffaloes over Singapore, decimated Curtiss P-40 Warhawks over Java, and swept aside British Hurricanes over Burma. The Zero achieved nearly complete initial dominance in the Pacific theater, and its elite pilots, like Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, veteran of the China campaign, had absolute confidence in their machine. They fully expected to face and defeat the same carrier-based F-4F Wildcats they had beaten before. This extreme confidence, forged by a year of unbroken victories, would only make the technological betrayal by the P-38 more devastating. The confidence of the Japanese fighter pilot was built upon a flawed philosophy. Japanese naval doctrine was rigidly built on the concept of the decisive battle and the supremacy of individual combat skill. They had no framework for understanding the relentless, systematic nature of American industrial warfare that was coming. This cultural fixation on warrior spirit translated directly into a fundamental, fatal design vulnerability. The Zero was engineered for maximum maneuverability with minimum weight. To achieve its legendary agility, engineers were forced to compromise on protection, deliberately lacking armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks in early models. This technological chasm was the ultimate cost of prioritizing tradition and individual prowess over the modern requirements of speed, altitude, and survivability. The reason for the P-38 Lightning's battlefield dominance wasn't a secret weapon. It was a simple, yet audacious design philosophy, born from a 1937 U.S. Army requirement for a high-altitude, long-range interceptor. While other nations were iterating on single-engine designs, Lockheed's legendary engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson, was drawing a fighter that was, frankly, an aeronautical e-ticket ride. His machine was a direct four-part manifesto: speed, altitude, firepower, and survivability. Johnson wasn't aiming to match existing planes. He was designing a time machine to a future war. The goal was a radical 400 miles per hour and the capability to climb into the thin air above 40,000 feet, an environment where contemporary Japanese fighters would literally gasp for breath. This twin-boomed marvel was the opposing thesis to the Japanese focus on pilot skill and nimble lightweight airframes. The P-38 was brute force industrial design, a metal fist built to overcome individual heroism. It was a clear, mechanical statement that the war would be won not by the samurai spirit, but by the overwhelming, audacious power of American production and engineering. The Japanese had built an elegant foil. The Americans had built a predator. The reason Japanese pilots couldn't outrun or outclimb the P-38 lay hidden deep in the airframe, a masterpiece of engineering that created technological awe. The twin Allison V-1710 engines, each mated with a revolutionary turbo-supercharger. This wasn't just a bigger engine. It was a fundamental shift in high-altitude performance. Consider the legendary A6M0. Its engine was a jewel of lightweight design, but the higher it climbed, the more the thin air choked it, losing power dramatically until it was barely developing 750 horsepower above 20,000 feet. The Zero was tied to the lower atmosphere. The P-38, however, used the exhaust gases to spin a turbine, forcing compressed air into the engine. This system effectively carried a dense, low-altitude atmosphere up to 30,000 feet and beyond. The P-38's power output remained terrifyingly consistent, giving it an overwhelming advantage in the vertical dimension. Furthermore, this twin-engine, supercharged setup also made the P-38 relatively quiet from certain angles, a sinister bonus. Japanese pilots, accustomed to hearing an enemy approach, were often caught completely off guard, realizing the lightning was upon them only when their cockpits began to shatter. The engineering secret was the true, silent killer. Beyond speed and altitude, the P-38 offered a brutal strategic advantage in two critical areas: firepower and survivability. Lockheed designers understood that in the fleeting moments of a dogfight, simplicity was lethal, while other Allied and Japanese fighters mounted guns in the wings, requiring pilots to perfectly judge a convergence point where the bullets would intersect. The Lightning concentrated its entire punch in the nose. This meant its armament, 4 heavy 50 caliber machine guns and a powerful 20mm cannon, shot a tight, unified stream directly forward, turning the P-38 into a flying shotgun. If the Japanese pilot was in the crosshairs, they were hit, point blank, regardless of range. This maximized lethal accuracy, a decisive factor in the unforgiving Pacific theater. Moreover, the twin-engine configuration was a lifeline. For the Zero, a single well-aimed bullet could shred the engine or ignite the fuel, often resulting in a fiery death or a long swim. The P-38, however, was designed to be a flying lifeboat. Even with one engine knocked out by flak or enemy fire, its surviving power plant and rugged structure allowed countless Lightnings to limp home, saving invaluable trained pilots and proving that the machine itself was built for the harsh realities of prolonged combat. The final decisive chapter in this conflict of design philosophies was the development of the boom and zoom tactic, the ultimate cinematic payoff. American pilots, having learned the painful lesson of never engaging the nimble Zero in a close quarters turning fight, devised a strategy that completely nullified the Japanese advantage. Speed and altitude became the weapon. The P-38 would use its turbo-supercharged power to climb high, then dive down upon the unsuspecting enemy at terrifying velocity, firing a concentrated burst, and immediately using its energy advantage to climb away, well out of reach, before the Zero's pilot could even register the attack. This was a flawless, one-way transaction. The Zero, a beautiful design at low speed, became a tragic flaw above 250 miles per hour. As its ailerons stiffened dramatically and its airframe struggled with speeds above 300. Against the Lightning's dives, the Zero was helpless, unable to follow or effectively evade. Early battles became brutally lopsided massacres, with outcomes like 15 Japanese fighters shot down for the loss of a single P-38. The legendary skill of the Japanese aviator was, in a flash, rendered obsolete by superior American engineering and doctrine. The devastating reality of the P-38's superiority soon reached the highest echelons of the Japanese Air Corps, leading to the climax of psychological trauma. The mythology of the nimble, invincible Zero didn't just crumble under the weight of metal and bullets. It was publicly dismantled by its own champions. Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, Japan's greatest living ace, offered an admission that carried a devastating weight across the pilot community. Sakai, a man who represented the zenith of Japanese aerial skill, later stated plainly, it was no longer possible for the Zero fighters to successfully engage the P-38s except under the most unusual conditions. This wasn't propaganda from the enemy. This was the painful truth from their own hero. It confirmed what every surviving pilot already feared in the deadly skies. Their most valued attribute, maneuverability, had been rendered obsolete. The Lightning wasn't just a threat. It was an insurmountable technological defeat, the ultimate deadly proof of the P-38's strategic value, and the climax of strategic power came on April 18, 1943, with Operation Vengeance. This mission wasn't a random dogfight. It was an execution order, targeting the architect of Pearl Harbor, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. This single event provided final, irrefutable proof that the Lightning's speed and range were strategically lethal. By decrypting Japanese communications, American intelligence pinpointed Yamamoto's flight path over Bougainville. The challenge was immense. 16 P-38Gs, had to fly a brutal 435-mile interception mission over open ocean, maintaining absolute radio silence and hitting a precise rendezvous point to the minute. The aircraft flew low, almost hugging the waves to avoid detection by Japanese radar, then executed a rapid climb to the interception altitude. The mission, planned with clockwork precision and executed flawlessly, resulted in the downing of Yamamoto's bomber, killing the most revered leader in the Japanese military. No other fighter available could have pulled off this feat of long-range navigation, speed, and endurance. It demonstrated to the Japanese High Command that the combined power of American intelligence, operational planning, and the P-38's unparalleled performance represented a capability Japan simply could not match. Their most prized asset could be hunted down and killed anywhere they dared to fly. The final, insurmountable advantage of the P-38 was not a technical feature, but the awe of production itself, a crushing industrial reality. The Lightning was a product of a system of continuous improvement that Japan could not replicate. Throughout the war, Lockheed manufactured over 10,000 P-38s, and critically, each new variant, the P-38J, P-38L, represented a direct response to combat feedback, featuring crucial improvements like intercoolers, dive flaps, and more powerful engines. The fighter was constantly evolving. In contrast, the legendary Zero suffered from institutional rigidity and resource constraints. Japan struggled to produce even incremental improvements, often sticking to its lightweight, outdated design, because its industry lacked the capacity to mass-produce powerful engines and complex supercharging technology. The Zero, for all its initial brilliance, became a symbol of stagnation. Captain Minoru Genda, a key architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, later admitted privately, "We are not just facing a superior fighter, we are facing a system of continuous improvement we cannot match." This system, the boundless capacity for mass production and rapid technological adaptation, was the true, terrifying weapon that defeated the Zero. The final and most heartbreaking disparity was the chasm in pilot quality, underscoring a deep sense of tragedy and futility. By mid-1943, Japan's high attrition strategy had cannibalized its veteran ranks faster than the nation's infrastructure could replace them. The initial cadre of highly skilled pilots was gone, replaced by pilots who were, heartbreakingly, little more than barely competent sacrifices. Facing catastrophic losses, Japan's once rigorous pilot training programs were brutally shortened from over 2 years to less than 6 months. New Japanese pilots were arriving in the theater with often fewer than 200 hours of flight time, lacking experience with instrument flying, high-altitude operations, or advanced tactics. They were essentially learning to fight under fire in an inferior aircraft. In stark contrast, American pilot training was a deliberate, institutionalized effort built for war endurance. U.S. Navy and Army Air Forces pilots were reaching the combat zone with anywhere from 400 to 600 hours of meticulous flight time. Their training included specialized twin-engine instruction for the P-38, high-altitude combat drills, and extensive use of camera gun practice to hone their accuracy. This meant the new American aviator was not just operating a superior machine. They were a highly trained professional facing an opponent who was tragically unprepared for the aerial hell of the Pacific. The final, most poignant measure of the P-38's dominance was the climax of cultural collapse. The psychological impact became so severe, it forced a direct reversal of the sacred Japanese warrior ethic. By late 1943, captured Japanese intelligence reports were circulating among their pilots with a chilling directive. The P-38 type fighter must be considered the most dangerous American aircraft. Engagement should be avoided unless possessing overwhelming numerical superiority and advantageous position. This was an utter, humiliating admission. Pilots trained since birth under the strictures of the Bushido Code to seek out combat, to never retreat, were now officially being told to run from the enemy. The very foundation of their martial philosophy was cracking under the weight of technological reality. The P-38 didn't just win battles, it systematically broke the spirit of an entire air force, replacing warrior fervor with the stark defensive calculus of survival. The ultimate consequence of the P-38 Lightning was a profound emotional resolution to the war's underlying philosophical clash. The shock it delivered to the Japanese Air Force marked the undeniable end of the era of the individual warrior pilot, where personal skill and a lightly built, maneuverable aircraft were the keys to victory. The Lightning was the agent of modernity, systematically dismantling tradition with cold, hard efficiency. The conflict was decided not by the elegance of a turn, but by the ruthless logic of industrial age warfare. Decisive victory was henceforward determined by the speed of technological innovation, the volume of systematic production, and the efficiency of industrial organization. The Bushido-infused ideal of the highly skilled samurai pilot was simply no match for the twin-boomed reality of American engineering and logistics. The P-38 proved that the machine, when backed by an inexhaustible industrial base, could overcome the man. This stark lesson was perhaps best summarized by Saburo Sakai himself in his post-war reflection. The P-38 taught us that the age of the samurai was over. It was the definitive, thunderous conclusion to a centuries-old tradition.